Hello, my name is Laura, and this is a short clip of my illustrated lecture, The History and Folklore of Santa Claus. Tradition says Bishop Nicholas died on December 6th, and his tomb was immediately revered as sacred ground long before he was elevated to the sainthood. After Bishop Nicholas's death, he was remembered for his kindness and generosity. He seemed to be all things to all people. By the time his reputation flourished after the year 1000, he was adopted as the patron saint of, quote, the clerk, the soldier, the tiller of the soil, women, children, the sailor, and the merchant, end quote, according to a 13th century French scholar. However, St. Nicholas was most often seen as the protector of children. Through the centuries, as Christians celebrated various saints on their feast day, they would spend that day recounting the good deeds and miraculous acts that saint had accomplished. St. Nicholas's feast day, December 6th, became over time an opportunity to teach children about that saint. It's difficult to trace exactly how stories about a kind old bishop morphed into a saint leaving treats as children slept, but here's one possibility. Saint Nicholas had taken a strong hold in Spain by the 15th century. From 1556 to 1714, the Spanish controlled part of the Netherlands and therefore had great influence on the people who lived there. During that time period, stories grew of Saint Nicholas magically traveling to each and every good Christian girl and boy on December 6th and leaving behind a small gift. Oddly, the Spanish seemed to agree that this was a Dutch tradition and even created a drawn-out explanation of St. Nicholas spending the majority of his time in Spain. But once a year, on December 6th, he would travel by boat to the Netherlands and, riding a white horse, would distribute gifts. In 1850, a storybook was published in the Netherlands about St. Nicholas and his travels, and introduced the character of Black Peter, who was either his servant or his slave, depending on what sources you read. So we have this adorable Dutch tradition of St. Nicholas distributing gifts, and we have a lot of Dutch moving away from the Netherlands to the New World. New Amsterdam was founded in 1624, and the Hudson River Valley was soon settled thickly with Dutch settlers. And, like most immigrants to a new location, they brought their beliefs and traditions with them. However, as generations passed, some stories and practices were lost or set aside. This worried a certain writer from New York, who was eager that some holiday traditions were not forgotten. Oh, not this particular holiday, but this particular writer. Washington Irving, best known for his story, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, was concerned about the growing absence of St. Nicholas in the lives of the Dutch children he saw around him. In 1809, Washington Irving published A Knickerbocker's History of New York, in which he took a satirical look at the new Americanized traditions of the Dutch settlers and their descendants. In the book, he mentions St. Nicholas by name and describes the apparently new traditions that Irving himself observed amongst his friends and neighbors. Quote, at an early period was instituted that pious ceremony still religiously observed in all our ancient families of the right breed, of hanging up a stocking in the chimney on St. Nicholas Eve, which stocking was always found in the morning miraculously filled. For the good St. Nicholas has ever been a great giver of gifts, confining his presents merely to the children in token of the degeneracy of the parents. End quote. This book, while not a runaway bestseller, did a fairly good job to remind his contemporaries of the old traditions of Santa Claus and how important he had been to the festivities of the winter season. Washington Irving started seeing a change in his neighbors as people started not only reintroducing Santa Claus, but also added to his history and persona. In the Dutch language, St. Nicholas was called Sinterklaas, which in America quickly became Santa Claus, with more drawn-out vowels. For a good deal of the 18th and 19th centuries, the two names were used interchangeably. This is a very important thing to realize. With each new iteration, almost with each new generation, Santa Claus slightly changes, morphs, is added on to, and is altered by the people who are sharing his story. This is the true definition of folklore: stories and tales told by common people for the common good. Thank you so much for joining me for this short clip of my illustrated lecture, The History and Folklore of Santa Claus. For more information or for information on how to hire me for the full presentation, please contact me through my website.